Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on the third day of Bread and Net. My name is Kassem Mnejja, and I'm the MENA campaigner at Access Now. I want to welcome all of you to this session entitled When MENA Governments Fail the Test, Internet Shutdowns During Exams, where we will be highlighting this practice in our region. This is a practice that unfortunately many governments are still doing by turning off the switch during national exams. This session would be a space to discuss, give an overview of shutdowns in the region, as well as think of ways in which civil society can work together to stop internet shutdowns in our region. We have a great list of speakers and experts from the region and elsewhere with us. And before moving forward, I want to do a quick round of introduction and welcome our speakers. Raya Sharbain, who works with JOSA, an organization based in Amman, Jordan, that works to promote digital rights and open source technologies. Mohamed Abdallah Ali, who we hope will be able to join us, who is an Iraqi journalist and blogger and a board member of the Iraqi Network for Social Media, INSEM. Mahran Ayoun, a Syrian programmer, web developer, digital security consultant, and trainer at the Salama Tech project with the SecDev Foundation. Felicia Anthonio, who works with Access Now as a campaigner and the lead for Keep It On, a global campaign that fights against internet shutdowns. And finally, Ali Sibai, who is an information security specialist and internet freedom researcher. The session will mostly be in English, with a few sections in Arabic that Raya has offered to help with interpreting into English. So thank you, Raya, for that, and thank you everyone for joining us. In 2020, Access Now and the Keep It On Coalition have documented at least 155 internet shutdowns in 29 countries. In the Middle East and North Africa, governments and authorities are still shutting off the internet during protests, civic unrest, and exams. For instance, Jordan experienced 3 national shutdowns in 2020, with the government restricting Facebook Live during a teachers' union protest in July and August, and the Ministry of Education blocking communication apps such as Telegram, WhatsApp, and Facebook during national exams. National secondary and high school exams are a big deal in the Arab world. I'm sure that most of the speakers here and the viewers know that and are familiar with the pressure that comes with those exams. Governments in our region administering these exams have even gone to the extreme of designating the integrity of these exams as a matter of national security. As a result, many of those governments regularly implement nationwide internet shutdowns during examination to foil students' attempts at cheating or sharing exam questions, which is what we're discussing today. Culprits of this draconian measure include Sudan, Algeria, Iraq, and Syria, and I'm happy to have with us today expertise and people from the region who can firsthand testify about this and share their experiences. So I'd like to start this conversation with a question to you, Felicia. If you can give us a quick introduction, a quick definition of what an internet shutdown is, and if you can tell us more about the Keep It On Coalition and what it does.
Thank you very much for putting together this session. And okay, I'm going to let our viewers know what the Keep It On Coalition is working with regards to definition of an internet shutdown. So in 2016, when the Keep It On Coalition was formed, and we came together to put together a working definition which looks at intentional disruptions of the internet, the whole internet or parts of it, or specific apps by governments during important national events, like as you mentioned, some shut down the internet during exams, others shut it down during protests, elections, conflicts, or any other crisis that may be happening in a particular country. So we focus on intentional disruptions because we want to hold governments and authorities accountable for violating fundamental human rights of citizens. So that is the definition that we work with. So what happens when a government shuts down the internet? it means that you are not able to access the whole internet, or you're not able to access platforms like Facebook, Twitter, like social media apps that you would normally use on a normal day. Some would shut it down completely. Sometimes they will slow down the speed, so you have access, but you can't use it for anything. You cannot upload pictures, you cannot watch videos, and you cannot, you can't just use the access that you have. And an example is what happened in Jammu and Kashmir, where internet speed would be reduced to 2G. And so just imagine, what can you use 2G internet access for? So in 2016, looking at how increasing internet shutdowns were becoming across the globe, as I mentioned, the Keep It On Coalition was born. And since then, we've been mobilizing to push back against internet shutdowns. So currently, we have about 250 organizations as part of the coalition. We are spread across the world, and we work together. There are countries where we have members where internet shutdowns don't happen, but we rely on this mobilization solidarity to be able to push against internet shutdowns. And we do this through awareness raising, capacity building, strategic litigation, which we'll speak more about in further discussion, and then also broadly letting governments kind of understand that internet shutdowns violate fundamental human rights, and so they should stop using them as and when they deem fit, and also engaging with the international community to pressurize governments to stop imposing internet shutdowns. And the coalition is open for civil society organizations that are interested in working on human rights related issues. And we do work with other partners in the private sector, like telcos, VPN service providers, the regional and international blocs, anyone that has the interest of the internet at heart. So that is that about the Keep It On coalition. I will drop the link for those who want to know more about this coalition. Thank you, Kassem.
Thank you, Felicia. I want to ask you, Raya, if you can tell us how often the Jordanian authorities resort to shutting down the internet in general, but as well as during the exams.
Okay, so one too many times is the answer. So it's since 2018 we've been observing, like you mentioned before, that the government tends to throttle the Facebook live streaming network during any political crisis, be it a protest or just generally, for example, when the issue with Prince Hamza happened in April of this year. It seems to be their only button right now in political crisis. So something happens, we shut down Facebook live streaming. And even we saw it recently with the Pandora Papers, since one of the members of the royal family was mentioned for a brief moment. It was also throttled when the announcement of the papers, during the announcement of the papers. But related to exams, it's been a few years now that during every national exam, and it's very specific, so it's around the schools during exam times. The government tends to shut down access to I think 7 to 8 applications, and the most popular ones, so Instagram, WhatsApp, Telegram, and those. And again, like other countries, it's to prevent cheating, in their words. This is perhaps the only time the Jordanian government is transparent with censorship, because it's the only time that the government comes out and notifies people about it, saying, we're going to shut down 7 to 8 apps during exam times and around schools, so be mindful of that in case you need access to the apps and you find them inaccessible at the time. So it's quite funny to us that it's the case. But yeah, so we've been, as a civil society organization, we've been trying to fight and campaign against it. It's and it's become boring now, because now every year we post the same thing saying there's no rule of law that states that you're allowed to do this, but I'll get to the legality later on. Thank you, Kassem.
Thank you, Raya. And yeah, like I agree with you with that. Like at certain moments you find that you know that you keep saying, repeating the same things, and like at sometimes it feels that the governments and the authorities are adamant on doing that like each time. But I think that we have some examples that in our region that governments are no longer shutting down the internet, and this is a perfect segue because Mohamed just joined us from Iraq. And Mohamed, can you tell us a bit about internet shutdowns in Iraq in general, and how often does this practice take place during exams? Because I'm aware that the government used to shut down the internet over the past few years in Iraq, but this year they haven't done that during national exams.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry I'm late. Yes, Kassem. Iraq government shut down the internet completely during the final exam between 4 to 8 hours a day, and this procedure was applied from 2015 until 2019 with the aim perfect to cheating exam. As well, this procedure was applied in Kurdistan region. But the last year, 2020, they didn't cut the internet. Also, they cut internet during the demonstrations. It resorted to restricting website and platform, social media platform, and VPNs in 2018 and 19. And this wasn't the first time, because the internet also cut in 2014 when the ISIS occupied Mosul. I think the government was taking advantage. I think, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Mohamed.
Yeah. Okay. I think the government was take an advantage of any event to cut the internet.
Thank you, Mohamed, for that. Ali, I'd like to ask you about internet shutdowns in the region, because you've covered this topic extensively in the past, and I wanted to ask you specifically about two countries, Sudan and Algeria. I know that these are two countries that have a history with shutting down the internet in general, but also during exams as well. Can you tell us more about that and about some of the trends that you've documented across the years in regards to Sudan and Algeria?
Yeah, thank you, Kassem. So technically, Algeria actually started to shut down the internet during exams in 2016. I mean, the first two countries who did this was Syria and Iraq, starting 2015. But since then, many countries have joined the club, let's say, like Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Mauritania, Algeria for sure. So for Algeria, in the past 2 years, they have actually shut down the internet. Like in 2020, they've done it around the first exams, around September, and they did it like around for 4 days during the exam times. And usually in Algeria, they have some time break between exams, so they restore the internet in between, which is good, just to make things easier, it seems. But maybe they give a break for 2 hours, and then even this year they did it around June, also for 5 days, like in the start in the morning, like around 7 or 8 a.m. until like in the afternoon. Mainly and I mean, when we try to document this in Algeria, like using open source data, most of the time we don't have we cannot detect any kind of internet disruptions. So in Algeria, I'm not sure how they technically do it, but we cannot actually detect any kind of disruptions. So most probably they slow down the internet in a way that they would do I would call it like network interference. So they would throttle the internet to the maximum, but not a total shutdown or total internet disruption. As for Sudan, they have started with this trend mainly in the just past 2 years, 2020 and 2021. And because like last year, because of the corona, of the pandemic, most of the countries, they did their exams around September. So most of those countries have, like around the August, September, most of them did this kind of internet disruptions. So in Sudan, also for a few days, 3-4 days, we were able to detect this kind of disruption using open data. Also this year, they did around for a few days around September as well. So yeah, both countries, Algeria and Sudan, they just started doing it again. Meanwhile, other countries like Syria have been, maybe Mahran would talk about it, like they've been the leader on this.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that we're talking about creativity and about governments finding like innovative tools to keep innovating on things like this, such as shutting down the internet. So yeah, Mahran, we know that the telecommunications and online space in Syria is largely dominated by the regime, and that the internet has been shut down multiple times over the past 10 years. Can you maybe expand a bit on this and also tell us about internet connectivity during the period of exams in Syria?
Thanks, Kassem. Maybe I'm going to speak in Arabic and Raya help me to translate. بداية 2011 نحن شهدنا حالات انقطاع انترنت قبل الثورة السورية قبل 2011 بس الحالات كانت نوعا ما محدودة، كانت بمناطق معينة. بس القطع الأكبر كان هو بعد 2011 بداية الثورة السورية اللي بلش قطع الإنترنت من درعا باتجاه بعض مناطق دمشق باتجاه ريف دمشق، وبعدين تعممت على معظم المناطق بسوريا. القطع كان دون اي سابق انذار، لانه الاجهزه الامنيه كانت يعني الى تحكم بشكل كامل على الانترنت وعلى مصادر الانترنت بسوريا. والقطع شهد يعني اكثر المناطق حيويه، يعني نحن عم نحكي بمناطق المشافي، المناطق اللي حتى كانت نحن بعدها فاتحه عندنا بسوريا الجامعه الافتراضيه السوريه، يعني كمان ما كانوا الطلاب يقدروا. انا كنت احد الطلاب يعني بالجامعه وما نقدر نقدم امتحانات لانه ما في انترنت، بدون اي سابق انذار. وتعقيد يعني تعقيد الوضع بعد ما صار في عندنا مناطق معزوله بالكامل، يعني نحن عم نحكي كنظام كان مسيطر عليه من برا، وداخل هي المناطق هي فيها فصائل المعارضه، فصار القطع دائم، يعني ما هو قطع بشكل دائم بدون اي حاله وصل، لدرجه انه حتى المناطق المحيطه بهي المناطق كمان صاروا يقطعوا الانترنت عنا، لانه كنا بطريقه او باخرى نقدر نلقط يعني ناخذ اشاره من هي المناطق.
Okay, so Mahran says that they used to see shutdowns before 2011, before the revolution, but it was limited and in specific places. And beginning 2011, when the revolution started, the censorship instances started to get much more frequent in places like Daraa, Damascus, and other parts of Syria. These censorship attempts would be without warning. They would happen without any sort of warning because the regime has full control over the telecommunications. And as I said, the censorship happened in the most populated places, but it affected students because there was a university in Syria which was a virtual university, and students couldn't even admit or do their exams. The matters got much more complicated because of external forces coming in. There was also increasing dissent. The censorship, I believe Mahran said, became much more permanent now. And yeah.
Thank you, Mahran, and thank you, Raya, for helping with the interpretation. Now I'd like to move to the second part of the conversation and ask all of the speakers from the region about the legality of shutting down the internet in each of their countries. I know that more often than not, governments in the region, like, they do whatever they want to do, regardless of whether that's legal or not. So with that in mind, if you can share with us like the process that each of your countries and the governments take in order to shut down the internet, especially during exams. And I'm also interested in learning and in hearing from you, like if the decision comes directly from the government itself, or are there any other actors in play? So we'll start with you, Raya, if that's okay. Like, who has the power to order that the internet is shut down in Jordan? And did the global pandemic affect that, especially that, different countries in our region have put in place specific laws and specific regulations that help them amass more power and more control?
Okay, thank you very much, Kassem. So there's one thing you should know about Jordan. There's only one law that talks about, that permits the government to censor websites, and that's the Press and Publications Law, and it's very specific. It's news publications or electronic news publications. This is the only law that currently, or like the only type of censorship that is legal or abides by the rule of law. Any other instances of censorship we see in Jordan are outside of that, and there is no text that says who is allowed and who is not allowed to order the censorship of certain services. I will say that sometimes we see the order coming in from a specific government entity, and sometimes it's just ISPs acting alone. In that case, for example, WhatsApp calls are banned in Jordan, and that's ISPs acting alone. We believe so, at least. But for internet shutdowns in specific, what we've seen, at least this year, is that the Ministry of Education was the entity that came out and ordered that shutdown, which is comedic to us, because suddenly the Ministry of Education has authority over the internet and over telecommunications. Currently, when you mentioned COVID-related consequences, currently in Jordan, we are under a defense law, so the Prime Minister has broad powers to issue defense orders without passing through Parliament or Senate. There are no orders that touch upon censorship so far. There is only orders around like sharing misinformation online, or like that's incriminated now, specifically misinformation related to the pandemic, and so on. We hope there's not no other defense orders that will be issued related to the internet. Currently, unfortunately, there is no expiry date to that defense law, so the Prime Minister still has that power, is able to issue orders at will.
Thank you, Raya, for explaining the situation in Jordan. And I'm interested in learning if if there's certain similarities between what has happened in Jordan and in other countries. So maybe I'll move to Mohamed and ask, like, if you can explain to us who has the power and authority in Iraq in order, like, to shut down the internet. Is it like orders from the ministries, such as the Ministry of Education, orders from the telcos themselves, or is the power centralized in the hands of the Ministry of Communication?
Thank you, Kassem. The internet and communication in Iraq, according to the constitution, is not subject to the government. There is an independent entity responsible for the internet, called Communication and Media Commission, CMC. When people express to the disconnect and activate with the organization start pressure. The CMC said, "We are not responsible for the shutdown the internet. We received request from the Minister of Education to cut the internet during the final exam." This is mean that the government was in way or another controlling the internet cut. Any ministry could submit the request to cut the internet and CMC will respond on it.
Thank you, Mohamed. Ali, I want to get back to you and ask you the same question, but about Sudan. And as you're aware, internet connectivity has only been restored recently in the country with everything that's been happening over the past few weeks. So if you can walk us through the different actors in play there and give us an overview of how internet shutdowns happens in Sudan.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, both Sudan and Algeria, mainly let's start with Sudan. So Sudan, the government controls around 30% of the main ISP and around 40% for investors, mainly UAE-led investors. So, and that way we can say that the government, in a way or another, the military control the internet in Sudan. So even when the first mass demonstration happened in late 2018 and 2019, 2020, and now the past few days, the military, since they are the ones who control the internet in Sudan, they are the ones who have the main control over it. So whenever they want, they can shut it down. And actually, just a few days ago, when the internet was shut down, so a court in Khartoum have ordered to detain two of telco's executive because they were shutting down the internet. So it seems like there is some contradiction between the military and the court of between the judiciary institutions in Sudan. So because of so two telcos executives were actually been detained until the internet would be restored, and just a few days back it has been restored, but with still limiting Telegram and WhatsApp in the country so far. So same thing in Algeria. The main ISP, Algeria Telecom, is owned by the government, which is in a way or another it is controlled by the military itself. So we can have this, we can project between Sudan and Algeria. So the military actually controls both infrastructures, let's say, or the directly or indirectly, the decision when to shut down the internet and when to cut it off.
Thank you, Ali, and it's really interesting seeing the similarities between those countries. And I'm interested, Mahran, to hear from you if there's any similarities between Sudan, Algeria, and Syria, and if you can share with us the process that the internet is ordered to be shut down in Syria, and also, basically if there's any similarities between what has happened in Syria over the past 10 years and what's been happening recently in Sudan and Algeria.
من قبل 2011 يعني من قبل الثورة السورية وحتى تاريخ اليوم كان قرار إغلاق الإنترنت هو قرار أمني بالمطلق. ما في أي تدخل لأي جهات قضائية أو أي جهات أو أي سلطات أو حتى بطلب من وزارات. يعني وقت بيصير في قطع الإنترنت على الطلاب المدارس على سبيل المثال ما بتاخذوا هذا القرار وزارة العدل أو بتاخذوا أي سلطة قضائية أو وزارة التربية، فهو بيروح من السلطات الأمنية بيتم اتخاذ القرار بقطعه. تعقيد الوضع بسوريا في مناطق خارجة عن سيطرة النظام السوري، وفي مناطق تحت السيطرة التركية، وفي مناطق تحت السيطرة التحالف الدولي. فكل منطقة من هي المناطق بتزود المنطقة اللي مسيطرة عليها بالإنترنت. يعني بدرعا كانوا مقطوع الإنترنت فكانوا ياخذوا من الأردن، بشمال سوريا بياخذوا من تركيا، بشمال شرق بياخذوا من العراق ومن كردستان، والمناطق تحت خضع سيطرة النظام بتاخذ انترنت من النظام. كل دولة من هدول الدول بتتعامل مع المناطق اللي مسيطرة عليها بالطريقة اللي يعني بطريقة أو سلطة أمنية. يعني وقت بيكون في عمليات عسكريه تركيه فبنقطع الانترنت عن الشمال السوري بالكامل، وقت بيكون في عمليات للتحالف او معارك كانت ضد داعش فبصير في قطع انترنت كمان على المناطق تحت سيطره قوات سوريا الديمقراطيه، وكذلك الامر بالنسبه للاردن. فما كان في اي تدخل من سلطات قضائيه او سلطات من وزاره الصحه مثلا او من وزاره التربيه بخصوص موضوع قطع الانترنت. حتى المناطق اللي مسيطر عليها خلينا نقول جبهه النصره اللي هي حاليا جبهه تحرير الشام، كمان وقت بيكون عندها عمليات عسكريه كمان بيتم قطع الانترنت عن هي المناطق. بالتالي عم نشوف هي السلطه امنيه محكمه بالمطلق على السيطره على الاتصالات.
بتمنى إنه لقطت كل شيء. Okay, I will translate. Before 2011 and before the revolution until today, the decision to censor the internet in Syria, it was a decision. It is a decision that is brought forward by the security apparatus in Syria. There is no input from other entities like the Ministry of Justice, even in cases of internet exam shutdown. So there are different parts in Syria. There are parts that are under Turkish control, parts under the control of Jabhat al-Nasr. There are parts that are under other foreign entities' control. So they will take their internet from their respective regimes. But from what I understood from Mahran is that when there is a shutdown of the internet, even their internet gets shut down. So there is sort of a central censorship apparatus that is controlled or initiated by the Syrian security apparatus. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Mahran, and thank you, Raya, for that. Ali, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add to Mahran is that, actually, when there is in Syria, because geographical Syria is different from who controls which part. But during exams, which the internet only is shut down where the regime is controlling, and it's mainly an effort by the Ministry of Education. But when it is military operations, the decision is taken by those who are leading this operation. But for the exams, it's mainly by the Ministry of Education. And it seems moving forward, they said they're going to use encryption to encrypt the exams, but to send the exams in an encrypted way. And in that way, it seems they're going to stop shutting down the internet. So the exams will not be leaked. So based on the last statements by the Minister of Education of the regime in Syria, that's what he said. Dr. Tabba, I think that's his name.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, for adding that, and I'm sure that our colleagues at SMEX and people at Access Now will be holding them accountable on everything that they're saying, and we're hoping that the internet won't be shut down next year during exams. I'd like to move now to Felicia and ask you, Felicia, our speakers have shared stories on how the internet is controlled by different actors in the different countries. And Ali spoke earlier a bit about what's been happening in Sudan and the process through which the internet was restored. Do you have examples, or can you share with us stories that have happened in other countries where civil society or different actors have successfully challenged internet shutdowns and managed to restore the internet despite the government's orders?
Hi, I lost my connection, so I just came back in. Is there a question for me? I didn't hear what you said.
Yep, I can repeat the question. So basically, our speakers have been sharing stories on how the internet is controlled by different actors in our countries, and I wanted to ask you if you can share with us, stories that have happened in other countries around the world where civil society or different actors have successfully challenged internet shutdowns and managed to restore the internet despite the government's orders.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I think the most effective tool that we continue to hope for more of that to happen is the use of litigation. And I think we saw what recently happened in Sudan, and this is the second time the Sudanese people are challenging a shutdown in courts. So that it's even though it took some time for the internet to be restored, I think that we can confidently say that this will set as a precedent when it comes to the fight against internet shutdowns. I think last year we also had some important rulings. One by the ECOWAS courts, the Economic Court of Justice of the Economic Community of West African States, ruling that shutdowns that the Togolese government imposed in 2017, even though they had ended, were illegal and did violate the rights of the people. So we had a ruling in 2020 and the shutdown happened in 2017, but civil society remained steadfast and made sure that they fought the case in courts. And thankfully, we had this important ruling by the ECOWAS court. Currently, there is the civil society is challenging the Twitter ban in Nigeria at the same court, the ECOWAS court. And we hope to see another important ruling regarding this case. I can also cite the case that happened in Zambia when the internet was disrupted around elections. Civil society organization took the case to the Zambia High Court, and the government was ordered to restore internet access. So these are some of the examples I can cite in a few minutes. But I think one thing we should all note is that in as much as litigation works, sometimes it's just impossible in some contexts. Certain countries, it's just almost impossible going to challenge the government in courts. So we continue to look at innovative ways of doing this. And you can see maybe you can resort to the use of regional courts, as we saw in the Togo case, to challenge internet disruptions in your country. So I think these are some of the ways that we can challenge it. And finally, it's also important to kind of let the judges understand exactly what it is we are challenging. So, for instance, Access Now will produce amicus briefs to explain what a shutdown is, how it impacts human rights, what laws provide for us to have access to, all these international and regional frameworks, and even national laws that guarantee access to using all these platforms, and the fact that internet shutdowns do violate fundamental human rights. So these are some of the ways that we can challenge shutdowns. And of course, we have to continue highlighting them as they happen, because they are becoming very sophisticated and happening in places that we didn't imagine they will happen, or it's difficult to know that it's actually happening there. And so we have to keep our ears on the ground and continue to do this important work that we are all doing. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Felicia, for saying that and for highlighting some of the wins that that we've been seeing recently, but also at the same time acknowledging that sometimes in different contexts and in different countries, it is a bit difficult to be able to, to help move things around. But as you mentioned, there's different ways and there's different avenues that we can explore and that we can think of in order for us to try and and prevent this practice. I want us now to discuss the effectiveness of such a practice, because most of the governments in the region say that they're shutting down the internet or blocking messaging apps during exams in order to stop and prevent cheating. So that's the main argument that they use each time. Although we know that by doing this, this affects a lot of people and communities especially during the past 2 years with the global COVID-19 pandemic that shifted norms for everyday life, where people now more than ever depend on the internet to get vital information, including updates from the government regarding COVID-19 and basically getting essential life supplies. So I want to start with you, Raya, and ask you whether the process of shutting down the internet during exams has ever been proven effective in Jordan by the authorities. So is there like any sort of evidence or statistics provided by the authorities? And if you can also tell us like about if there's any examples that you might have where people or businesses were harmed whilst the internet was shut down for national exams.
Yes. So definitely not effective. The government has never released anything to prove their point, but I never expect them to anyways in Jordan. But and I always give this anecdote. When I was in school, they used to take away our phones anyways, and we used to ask the teacher to go to the toilet and put the papers behind the toilet seat. So we would always find ways to cheat in any case, because this is their main argument. But to be serious, a bit more serious, actually there is very harmful effects to internet shutdowns generally, but specifically with when it happens during exams. I mean, this year, when exam times happened, it was also in parallel of the vaccine rollout in Jordan, and there were vaccine centers scattered around the country, and it so happens that some of these vaccine centers were around schools. So we started receiving reports that the vaccine centers themselves didn't have access to certain websites and services. Their internet was slow, and because they do need it when a citizen comes through or a resident comes through to register for that they've taken the vaccine, this all happens online. It doesn't happen on paper, and so this service was impacted. We've also heard many other instances of offices being impacted because in Jordan there is no, I mean, schools are everywhere, and so there is definitely high probability of an office being next to a school. And so in Jordan we rely a lot on WhatsApp for even professional communications, and so this would be off for like a good part of the day. So it's like an unofficial holiday for people. It's very unfortunate. The impact is very much negative, and there's no justification to this sort of shutdown.
Indeed, Raya, and yeah, it is unfortunate that stuff like this are still happening, especially now with the fact that like everyone relies on the internet, and it is as vital as ever. Ali, I'm interested in hearing from you on some of the harms that this might have caused in Algeria, especially that the country is adamant and insists on shutting down the internet for what is now, I believe, the 6th year straight. So I'm wondering if there's like any instances or any harms that have been documented in Algeria during the baccalaureate exams.
Yeah, actually, like, I mean, documentation for Algeria's internet disruption is like, again, minimal, but based on few first-hand accounts, like the entire business operations, day-to-day, people like doing their work, especially during the pandemic, the past 2 years, like there's a total, like people were not able to do any kind of work until like 7 or 8 p.m. So actually, during those 5 days, everyone's, at least with those who I talked to, everyone's day started at 7 p.m. or whenever the break between the exams. So it has been like a total disaster for a week. Everyone had to shift their work schedule, and they had to go extended work schedule because they needed to finish their work. And for some people, for example, they were not able to submit some scholarship applications because that internet shutdown happened during that period, and so they were not able to go to their college. That's for example. As for Sudan, the harm was mainly repressing footage and documenting what was happening during the demonstrations in general. But I mean, other than Algeria and Sudan, for example, when like in Lebanon currently, like not maybe now, but few months back, when there was like internet disruption because of the fuel shortage, people had to flee Lebanon and go somewhere else to continue working and do some kind of work. So it's not always sometimes regarding the internet disruption could affect people's life just during exams or during protests, but also when like in the case of Lebanon, when there is some kind of fuel shortage, the internet service provider not able to have the power to power on the routers. I think it's the same thing in Syria at one point or another. So, and I think it happened last year in Jordan when there was a total power shutdown. So it also affected the internet services. So when internet goes, everything stops, especially during the pandemic.
Indeed, Ali. And yeah, like Mahran, I want to ask you the same questions on Syria, on the effectiveness of such a practice, but also I want to hear from you, like if you can share with us like how harmful internet shutdowns has been for the country over the past 10 years or so.
بالحقيقه هو ما جاب ابدا فاعليه او الهدف على الاقل الهدف المرجو منه مثل ما قالوا انه هن بيقطعوا الانترنت مشان موضوع الامتحانات. هلا باعتبار سوريا عليها اساسا تحت العقوبات الامريكيه من 2004 فما كثير يعني في هذا حجم الاعمال خلينا نقول اللي كان موجود مثلا بالاردن ولا موجود بلبنان، بس اثر على طريقه تواصل الناس، اثر على كمان جانب كبير من الامتحانات خاصه بالجامعات اللي كانت بتعتمد الدراسه اونلاين. بالجانب الاخر هو ادى لحياه لانه ناس كثير تفقد حياتها وخاصه يعني بهي المناطق اللي كانت محاصره من النظام السوري. انا بذكر تماما من 2013 انا كنت بالغوطه، ما كان في تواصل ابدا مع العالم الخارجي، يعني كنا نعتمد على شبكات انترنت موجوده داخل الغوطه ويكون في عندنا جهازين او 3 اجهزه انترنت فضائي نقدر نتواصل معه. في يعني ما نقدر نتواصل مع الهلال الاحمر، ما نقدر نتواصل مع الهيئات الدوليه اذا في حالات طبيه معينه بدها تطلع من الغوطه. نتيجه قطع الانترنت مش داخل بس المناطق المحاصره يعني اللي هي اندر سيج، حتى المناطق المحيطه فيها كان مقطوع الانترنت عندها. فيعني وصلت صار في حالات وفيات كثيره، في حالات ولاده، في قصه كثير معروفه عن فصل توأم نتيجه عدم القدره على التواصل او نقدر نحن نطلعه برا الغوطه.
So like everyone, like in Jordan and Sudan and Algeria and Lebanon, it's not as effective, or shutting down the internet during exam times is not as effective as the regimes and systems claim it to be. It's something that Mahran said is that it specifically affects how it leads at least to the loss of life. For example, he was in Ghouta back in 2013, and the internet was completely shut down there. There was no communication with the outside world, no way to contact the Red Cross, no way to even contact any medical services. He mentioned there was a small, I guess, an intranet only, but generally the internet was completely shut down, and also places around the Ghouta were affected. This led to a lot of loss of life, and there was a famous story of I believe he said that there was a doctor who, or a group of surgeons who were trying to separate joint twins, and they didn't even have access to up-to-date medical information related to this surgery or operation, which led to the loss of life. So this is a very extreme consequence to the internet shutdowns. Hope I did you justice.
Thank you, Mahran, and thanks, Raya. And yeah, like it is unfortunate, like when you hear stories such as these, and I think that they, you know, they showcase how important like internet is, internet this day and age, and how like and how like the loss of internet and the loss of connectivity can literally like kill people, and lives are lost. So I'm conscious of time, but I want to ask Mohamed, because he mentioned earlier that there weren't any shutdowns during exams this year, which is a good sign that we hope other countries would follow. So could you tell us if this is due, if you think that this is due to the ineffectiveness of this practice, or are there, in your opinion, other reasons behind the government and the Iraqi authority ending this practice this year?
Let me give you some static before I answer. Iraqi losses for a total of 263 hours of disconnecting are estimated to in a $2.3 billion. Here we should ask, did the shutdown the internet prevent cheating in exam? I think the answer is no. Why? Because the student find a new way to cheat. For example, they're using the small headphone that can be behind inside the air, and it's work with the cell phone network. The cell phone network is not cut during the internet, during the exam. Just the internet is cut. So the answer is maybe there is no point. The government understand there is no point with cutting the internet.
Thank you, Mohamed, and we really do hope that other governments would soon follow and would understand that there isn't a point behind doing this, and that students will always find creative ways to overcome such practices. I think we have 1 minute, so I want to open this space to any one of you if you have anything else to share before we wrap up, and like if you have any ideas or any avenues or any quick stories to share about how we can work as civil society and as activists in order to to fight against the shutdown. And I'm seeing that Tali raised your hand, so I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing we can do as society is to continue on documenting internet disruptions, whatever they are, whatever like the time span is. There's like 1 hour, 2 hours, because eventually this will make maybe the Iraqi government have did not maybe eventually shut down the internet because there was so much, let's say, noise about it when it happened in 2019. And I think documentation is important as the litigation, in my opinion.
Indeed. Thank you, Ali.
Okay. Yes,
Felicia,
and I think collaboration. Yes, collaborations are also important, and we'll continue to name and shame governments that shut down the internet.
Exactly. I think that's a great point to end on. That will be continuing to name and shame governments that use this, that do this practice in our region and elsewhere. I want to thank you, Ali, Felicia, Mahran, Raya, and Mohamed, again for all of your input and insight and expertise and the examples that you've provided in on this practice in this region. And thank also Smex and Bredenet and everyone that tuned in for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.